Welcome back to Midnight Whispers Stories. What you are about to read are real accounts submitted to us by ordinary people. 17 years ago, I discovered a horrifying secret about my grandfather. The worst part is I wasn't surprised for most of my childhood. I lived in an isolated countryside in rural New York with my family. There were almost no other young people there. It was the kind of place elderly people moved to so they could slowly die in peace. An unofficial nursing home for uncooperative elders. That's a morbid way of putting it, but it was true. For that reason, I never really bothered to leave the house. There was nothing. I don't think anyone else in my family really did either. It didn't help that we were Jehovah's Witnesses. So even if there were young people, I probably wouldn't have been allowed to hang out with them. It's been over a decade since I left my family. Almost 2 decades actually, but I still struggle to sleep at night. I feel like I'm constantly carrying around a heavy weight. Hopefully telling my story, even if it's just as simple as writing it down, will help me feel unburdened. I doubt it will, but I'm out of good ideas. My story starts in 2008. I think might have been 2009 or 2010. Sorry, that doesn't matter. I was going for a walk in the woods by my house. That was one of my favorite and only pastimes. The woods were deep and twisting, with a canopy so thick barely any light came through. Most of the trees must have been thousands of years old. They were all sturdy dark oaks that towered above me. Paths were few and far between, and those few paths had been desecrated by roots protruded from the ground like tumors. I had had a few nasty falls there, but it didn't matter to me. I still went for walks. While walking through the woods that day, I heard a rumbling nearby, sort of like an engine. It was like an engine because it was an engine, but I didn't know that yet. A singular lizard scuttled from its hiding place in a hollow, dead log. This wasn't normal. There were roads in the woods, but they were rarely, if ever, used. I don't even think they were mapped on GPSs. I followed the sound, hoping to find something, anything. I noticed that the rumbling was coming from the direction of an abandoned house I had stumbled upon a few times. It wasn't quite as downtrodden as some of the other abandoned houses, but it was still pretty bad. I tried to avoid it because of all the mold. When I arrived at the source of the noise, I was taken aback. There were multiple trucks. And they weren't just any trucks. They were moving trucks. I spied a family of 3. There was a tall, dark-haired mother with a pale face and green eyes. I didn't pay attention to her much. I was interested in 2 kids who looked like they were of similar age to me. One was a girl with short black hair who was the spitting image of her mother. The boy looked very out of place. His blonde hair and blue eyes made him look like a character from a 1950s sitcom. I tried to get closer, but I stepped on a twig. As it snapped, the mother loomed in my direction. I scurried back into the woods like a rodent, hoping I hadn't been seen. I was back at the house just before dinner. As much as I hated it, it was a very nice house. Grandfather had accrued a fortune in the slaughterhouse business and got himself a nice mansion, which he all but forced the whole family to move into. I went to the shed to get a spare key and let myself into the house, nearly colliding with my mother. I did not like my mother very much. I almost never saw her. She was always hurrying off to some errand or the other. Out of my entire family, besides maybe grandfather, she was without a doubt the most pious. She was always reading some sort of Watchtower publication or hounding the poor grandmas who walked the streets of the nearest town. My father was bullied out of my life and his marriage by grandfather, leaving us in near poverty since my mom never got her high school diploma. She had a large stack of Watchtower magazines she was probably planning to hand out, which I had knocked out of her arm. I quickly got on my hands and knees, gathering all of them before she could get to bed. When I handed them to her, she promptly slapped me and hurried off. I went further into the house, and a horrid smell assaulted me. I assumed Aunt Helen was cooking again. Aunt Helen had never married or had kids. I suspect she tried to compensate for this by acting like a mother to me. She constantly cooked for me and cleaned my room and bought me stuff. She was the only member of my family who I loved. She was pretty overbearing though, constantly following me around and fussing over me. Arrived at the dining room, the largest room in the house. The table had already been set, although no food was on it. There were 2 other people already there, Uncle Roger and Grandfather. Uncle Roger's wife had disappeared 2 years before this story, and he had never been the same. He had been reduced into a hollow shell of a human being, who never laughed or even smiled. I didn't pay much attention to him. All he really did was agree with grandfather and stare at the wall. Grandfather's eyes locked onto me. I hurried to my chair beside him, hoping I could outrun his gaze. "Don't run in the house," he said. "I don't want you slipping and cracking your skull open." "Now sit down," I obliged. "How has your day been?" asked Uncle Roger, his voice quivering ever so slightly. "Good," I replied, even though I hadn't heard him. "Speak louder, Roger." "Leo, don't lie," I nodded. "Use your words." "Yes, sir," I replied. Carefully, I put the napkin on my nap, making sure not to drop it. "So, don't stutter," interrupted grandfather. "I noticed a family was moving into the old abandoned house. The one with the chimney that exploded. I wonder why you thought to mention that. Is there perhaps a young girl in this family?" asked grandfather. "No, sir," I lied. I felt a sharp, sudden pain in my foot as something smashed through my shoe and collided with it like a bullet. I gritted my teeth and made sure I didn't make a single sound. Grandfather lifted his walking stick off my foot. "You know better than to lie, Leo. There is a son, also a daughter, but I'm not interested in her like that. There's a mom but no dad," I added. Grandfather scowled at the last part. "If they aren't witnesses, there's no point in engaging with them, and it sounds like they aren't since the mother is clearly a whore. Don't interact unless you want hell." "You don't want hell, do you, Leo?" "No, sir." "Good." The door opened, and Aunt Helen hurried in with the food. She smiled when she saw me. "How was your walk?" she asked, handing me a bowl of spaghetti, and my mouth instantly began watering. "It was good." "Ma'am, please, just call me Auntie," she said, smiling. Grandfather said, "Don't call her that." Helen's smile dropped. "Smile less. You'll never get yourself a husband if you smile too much." "Yes, sir," said Helen. "Now where's your mother?" asked grandfather, even though he already knew the answer. Handing out magazines again, grandfather cracked a grin. "Now that's a good daughter. She even gave me a grandson." "You should be more like her, Helen." Admittedly, I was always relieved to see Helen come into the room. Grandfather had a ranking of us in his head, and Helen was lower than me on it. That meant that when she and I were in the same room, she would be the recipient of grandfather's wrath. Now that I think about it, I can't help but wonder if that was why she seemed to constantly follow me. Maybe she was protecting me from grandfather. He turned his head slowly, his eyes stalking Aunt Helen. When she was behind Uncle Roger, his eyes seemed to look through him and into her soul. Her hand had the slightest tremor. Grandfather's eyes locked in on it. His walking stick lurched forward and onto Helen's hand, pinning it to the table. "There's no reason to shake," he said, anger dripping from his voice. Not much else happened that day. My mother never showed up. I went to bed, the two new kids on my mind. I was homeschooled my entire childhood, so I didn't have anything to look forward to on Wednesday. I was woken up by grandfather at 6 a.m. Funny how for all his talk of hard work, I never did a single thing at homeschool, at least when it came to learning. I mostly just did a bunch of chores and then went for a walk. But during my walk that morning, I came across something I did not expect. I saw them, on a rock, laughing. I moved silently towards them, being careful to avoid the litany of loose twigs, until I could see them. They were on a large rock, one of the few places the sun beamed through the canopy. I couldn't understand what they were saying. They seemed to be speaking in a foreign language. Their talking quieted down, and the boy stood up. "Anyone there?" he called, picking up a large stick and holding it like a staff. At that moment, I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I stepped out from behind a tree. He still held his stick, waving it around threatening. "You, what are you doing here?" he barked. I stumbled back, and the girl put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "What's your name?" she asked. I thought back to what grandfather had told me and asked, "Are you a witness?" "What the hell's that mean?" said the boy. I took that as a no, which was an instant cue for me to run back home. But I didn't. "My name's Leo," I said. The girl smiled. "My name's Anya Petrova. This is my brother Trevor," said Anya, smiling. I've changed Anya's last name here to the most basic Russian name possible, since the last name she gave was very unique, and it would be easy to find more info about her online. I slowly approached them with the caution of someone approaching a wild animal. Anya did not have the same caution. Anya was a lot taller than me, and when she got to me she patted me on the head. I blushed a bit, causing Trevor to collapse into uproarious laughter and drop his stick. I released a breath. Up until then I had been worried Trevor would try and kill me. I studied Trevor carefully. "How old are you?" asked Anya. 13. "Wow, you're really short." "We're also 13. I nodded vigorously, thinking that the more I nodded the more interested I'd seem. Trevor pulled a bag of cookies from his pocket. He grabbed a cookie and tossed it to me. I missed it. He sighed and threw another one to me, which I barely caught. Without a second thought, I devoured the cookie, and its melty chocolate exploded in my mouth. "Where did you get this?" I asked, voice muddled from all the chocolate still in my mouth. "Our mom's a baker. She bought the closed-down bakery down in town." I wasn't familiar with a closed-down bakery in town. I remember the old baker there used to be amazing. "I still wonder what happened to him," I said. Anya and Trevor nodded, and I could feel their interest in the conversation slowly waning. Desperately, I added, "Maybe the butcher got him." "What?" said Trevor, leaning in to listen closely. A single bead of sweat fell down my forehead. I thought back to grandfather's talk of how annoying butchers were, and quickly came up with a story. Long ago in 1840, there was a butcher, but this wasn't any butcher. You see, he actually sold human meat. And when the town found out, I remembered a story my mom told me about a mob of people in Africa stoning some witnesses to death. They formed a mob and stoned him to death, but he survived, only as a ghost. Trevor cracked a wide grin. "He's probably just making things up," said Anya. "Not," I insisted. Anya frowned at me, and I instantly felt bad. I had to make it up to her. "There's an old abandoned butcher's shop I think belonged to the butcher. I can show it to you if you want." I did know where an abandoned butcher's shop was, but as far as I was concerned it was completely normal. Anya's frown faded. "Can you show it to us?" she asked eagerly. I nodded. I joined their conversation from then on out, not really understanding what they were talking about. The newest Twilight move had come out at the time, and Trevor made fun of Anya for liking it. When Trevor asked me what I thought, I just agreed with Anya. She asked me some questions about it, but I managed to quickly change the subject. They talked a good deal about their old school and how it apparently sucked. I said I was homeschooled, and they seemed curious, so I told them about it. They said homeschool seemed fun. The 2 hours passed in a flash, and I soon realized that I needed to head back for the Kingdom Hall meeting. "What's your number?" asked Anya. "I don't have one, ma'am. In that case you can meet us at our house at 10 p.m. You know where it is, right?" I nodded. Trevor did an awkward finger gun at me as I left, while Anya just waved goodbye. When I arrived back at the house, Aunt Helen greeted me. She had a worried expression on her face. When I got to the door, she looked around for grandfather, and quickly rubbed some leftover chocolate I hadn't noticed off my face. "You really should be more careful," said Aunt Helen. I nodded, realizing with a shiver that if he had seen the chocolate, grandfather would know I had done something I wasn't supposed to do. I thanked Helen and hurried up to my bedroom to get changed. I was extra fidgety that day. It was most likely a mix of excitement and nervousness. A couple times I considered confessing to grandfather about what I had done, but I was in too deep. After Kingdom Hall, grandfather asked me to visit him in his study. His study was bare, with no personal decorations other than a threadbare rug and a leather armchair. When he wasn't patrolling the house like a warden, he was there, reading some boring self-help book. His shelf took up nearly the entire wall. On the chair beside him was some sort of Christian parenting guide. "You seem nervous today," said grandfather. "Do I?" He frowned and smashed my foot with his walking stick. "Don't play dumb, boy. I know you're hiding something from me. You returned from your walk later than usual. Were you perhaps talking to the people you were talking about yesterday?" "And no, sir." He slammed his walking stick on my foot again. "Yes, sir." He nodded. "You should be more honest with me. I understand why you did it, but do it again, and you're never leaving the grounds again." "Got it?" "Yes, sir," I said as I got up to leave. But grandfather stopped me. "Did I ever tell you the story of how I got my fortune?" he asked. I nodded. "No, you've only heard part of it." I turned to leave, but he stopped me again. "Don't leave. You haven't heard the story. You know, I hated my grandfather as a kid. He was a strict witness, just like I am now, and never let me do anything. At least, that's how it felt to me. And one day, I snapped at him. I called him a tyrant and told him to go to hell. He whipped me a couple times, and I asked him if that was the best he got. He whipped harder, but I just smiled at him. Eventually, he stopped and went up to his room. I thought I had won. I thought I was now the king of the house. You can imagine my surprise when my grandmother told me that not only was he writing me out of the will, he was going to kick me out in 1 week. You know what I did then? No, sir. He pulled out a knife from his coat. I got a kitchen knife, went up to his room, and killed him. He was writing his will when I did it. I'll cherish that look on his face forever, the look of pure fear. It was a remarkably stupid thing to do, but I managed to burn the will and pin it on my grandmother. My mother also lived in the house, and me and her testified against her, claiming that she and grandfather had a fight, and that we heard the body hit the floor. He tossed the knife to me. The others are trying to kill me. I've seen Aunt Helen try putting poison in my tea. She's never managed to kill me. I've seen your mom in my room with a kitchen knife while she thinks I'm asleep. Even Uncle Roger, he tried to throw a brick at me once. You're my favorite, you know that. Yes, sir, I said. I hurried out of his study as fast as possible, clutching the knife in my hands. I went to bed around 8 at night. Since it would take about an hour to get to their house, I decided to leave at 8:30 to be early. There was a side entrance that was very rarely used and quite quiet. Plus, I had learned a long time ago how to keep my footsteps silent. But when I tried to slip through the door, something strange happened. I couldn't open it. My door had no lock on the outside, so it wasn't locked. Whatever it was, something heavy was pressed against the door. The only other way outside was the window. I was on the second floor of the house. The only way to get out the door without getting injured was to climb down. But I was as unathletic as hell, still am, so that was out of the question. But I was determined to get out. So, slowly but surely, I opened the window. It creaked so loudly it was a wonder grandfather didn't barge in then and there, but I had to get out. Once it was fully open, I perched on it and slowly lowered myself. Once I was hanging from the windowsill, I took a deep breath and let go. Pain. I hit the flower bed with a deep thud. Pain ricocheted up my legs, and I yelped as I collapsed into the thorn-covered rose bush. I felt the thorn snag on my skin and rip small cuts open as my leg throbbed. My arms were covered in cuts, some of which were bleeding, but I wouldn't stop. I stood up and nearly had a heart attack. Seeing me through the window was Aunt Helen. I sighed when she mimed zipping her lips and walked away. My pocket felt empty, and I realized I had dropped the knife in the flower bed. After retrieving it, I left the house. I staggered through the woods, limping on one knee. I could feel someone watching me, but I tried to brush it off. When I looked back, I saw through my bedroom window what looked like a silhouette. It was probably nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. Eventually, after an agonizing hour of limping through the woods, I finally made it and saw Anya and Trevor outside, waiting for me. The blood had long stopped. I cracked a pained smile as I limped towards them. Trevor seemed to be carrying some kind of bag that clinked faintly as the wind moved it. Anya looked worried when she saw me limping. Are you good? Anya, I just had a fall. Oof. Must have been bad. Yet, come on, let's go see the butcher. Whined Trevor. What's in the bag? He gave a playful wink and hurried off into the woods. Anya leaned in and whispered something into my ear. I didn't quite catch it, but I just nodded and pretended to have heard. Leo seemed to be in pretty good spirits. He was all but skipping along the woods, grazing the grass. Anya offered to help me walk, but I refused, not wanting to seem uncool. The woods got thicker and thicker until it felt like I was being choked. It was a part of the woods I almost never traveled. Moonlight was barely scraping through. Anya took out an electric candle and turned it on, allowing us to see the winding trees all around us. I couldn't help but ask why a candle. She just shrugged and said something about setting a spooky atmosphere. I thought the atmosphere was already spooky enough. We were going to an abandoned butcher's shop after all. There could still be meat there. I didn't quite know what to do if they got mad at me and claimed I had been lying. I'd probably just say any leftover meat was actually human meat. The first time I had found the butcher's shop was completely accidental. I had heard grandfather talking about it before, of course, but I hadn't actively looked for it. Pretty sure it took a couple weeks to put two and two together and realize the butcher's shop I had found was the one grandfather constantly talked about when he wasn't criticizing someone. He said it was a great place to think, though he rarely, if ever, actually left the grounds. After following the winding path through the trees, by path I mean where we could walk without getting impaled by thorns, we eventually came across the rock we had first met. Trevor collapsed on the stone, clearly exhausted from lugging around the huge bag. He swung it around in front of him and untied the knot on it, revealing a cornucopia of different beers. I stumbled back. Trevor shrugged. Mom forgot to lock her cupboard, explained Trevor. I don't think I should buy started. What? Are you scared? Called Trevor. Trevor, don't, I interrupted Anya by snatching a bottle of beer from Trevor's bag and downing it. At least, that's what I imagined doing. In actuality, I struggled with the cap until Anya helped me. Then I downed it. It tasted absolutely foul, worse than almost any other drink that had ever touched my tongue. I had the distinct feeling that drinking bleach would have been a more favorable experience. Nonetheless, I pushed it down. Anya rushed over to support me so I wouldn't fall down, even though the alcohol hadn't affected me yet. My stomach pushed it up, but I tried to hold it down. Trevor offered one to Anya. She took a couple sips before discarding it with a comment about its taste. Soon, the initial buzz set in. It felt horrible, but I pretended to enjoy it. There was a question weighing on my mind though. Why does your mom have so much beer? She's not an alcoholic or anything. My dead dad owned a brewery, said Anya. Sorry, no need for all that. It was before I was born. I couldn't care less about him, said Anya, though there was still a pained expression in her eye. Then Trevor is I'm adopted, slurred Trevor. He was pretty bad at pretending to be super drunk, but he was trying. Anyway, come on, let's head to that butcher's shop. Suddenly, Anya shushed us. Trevor cocked his head in confusion. Anya's face seemed white. What's wrong? I asked. Nothing, just thought I heard a. It's nothing. Spooky. What was it? I asked. She shook her head and began backpedaling away from me. I'm telling you it's probably nothing, she suddenly yelped. A scream erupted from my mouth, imagining the worst. Her face was contorted in pain, blood trickling from her hand. I rushed over and saw a large thorn had caught her hand. She tried to rip her hand away, but that just made her cry in pain more. How to get the thorn out of her? My first thought was to use my knife to free her. That's when I first noticed something odd. The knife wasn't in my pocket. Where had it gone? Had it just fallen out of my pocket, or had something taken it? I pulled myself together and carefully grabbed the thorn, pulling it out slowly. Should we head back? Asked Trevor, surprising me with his sudden consideration. No, cried Anya, clutching her hand. How far is the butcher's shop? I thought, which was pretty easy. After all, there were no distractions. The crickets had gone silent for some reason. About 100 yards. We can probably make it. Anya nodded and marched on with renewed purpose. I tried to keep up, but I kept on falling down and tripping on things. Trevor was in an even worse state. He could barely walk at all. But Anya marched on, and we had no choice but to follow her. And then, what felt like hours later, we found it. It was a wonder the shop hadn't collapsed already. The wood was rotting, and whole sections were missing, exposing the innards of the building. There was a name carved into the wood that had long since faded away. You could smell the faint scent of blood from 100 feet away, and the air tasted faintly of decay. Clumped the base of the building were piles of plywood, and pieces of thrown-out furniture were strewn about, from termite-infested couches to a refrigerator that was split in half. The windows were completely boarded up, and graffiti defaced all the walls of the building. You're right, this place is for sure haunted, said Trevor, a slight quiver in his voice. He was standing up straighter now, evidently too scared to care about pretending to be drunk. I laughed. Trevor, are you scared? No. He marched up to the door, pouting the whole way. Anya and I followed behind him, anticipating the moment where we'd go in. Trevor put his hand on the dustless door handle and stepped into the shop. Trevor screamed. Anya and I rushed in. On what was supposed to be some kind of rack, an animal carcass was hanging. I felt it was quite anticlimactic. It was an abandoned butcher's shop. I failed to consider that it was clearly a fresh carcass. I couldn't tell what animal it was. The carcass had been damaged beyond recognition. But I was fairly certain that it was a deer carcass. There were a lot of deer where I lived that the old people liked to hunt. The inside itself was pretty boring. It was just rotting boards, dirt, and a counter. Trevor pointed at the carcass, shaking uncontrollably. "It's a corpse." I cackled, smiling that I had finally gotten a chance to one-up Trevor. "It's just a deer, I can tell." The last part was a lie. I actually couldn't tell. I'm pretty sure it was a deer carcass though, even now, after everything else that happened. As a show of my maturity, I marched up to it and grabbed it, smirking as I did so. A trickle of the deer's fresh blood stained my sleeve. "What if there's some hobo living here who killed the deer?" asked ANYE. Trevor said, "I'll just beat him up," having regained some of his bluster. His face was still white. "Sure you can," I joked, walking forward. "Come on. There's a room we haven't explored yet." Anya stared at me. "You've been here before." I turned away, my eyes widening. "Yeah, but only during the day. When the butcher isn't on the hunt." "Why didn't we explore during the day then?" said Anya. "'Cause we're not cowards. Come on. Maybe we'll find more corpses in the other room," said Trevor. Anya shuddered. I gestured for her to come over, and she walked so slowly she might as well have been going backwards. We rounded the corner of the counter, revealing a door that we hadn't seen before. In truth, I had never been in the back room. Always assumed it was locked. Turns out the assumption was right, and the door handle clattered. Anya gave a sigh of relief, and Trevor just looked disappointed. "Come on then," said Trevor. "Don't worry," I said hurriedly. "I have a plan." I started searching through the drawers. There was nothing there, except a bolt gun. There was no reason to question in my mind its presence. If grandfather had embarked more of his slaughterhouse onto me, I might have thought that it was weird for a bolt gun to be in a butcher's shop. They're usually only used in slaughterhouses. I showed it to the other two, proud as can be. I put it against the door lock and fired. After that, the door opened with ease. Red light poured out from the room. A clothesline hung from wall to wall with photos hanging off it. There was a single table in the room, covered in containers of various chemicals. A canister of film was shoved in the corner. Our footsteps sent a couple roaches scuttling to the corners of the room. In short, it was a dark room. Anya slowly approached the table, shaking more and more by the minute. She opened the drawer and took out a thick photo album. Trevor rushed past me, eager to see what was in it. I nervously joined them, just in time to see what was in the photo album. They were of me. Not baby photos or family photos. Photos I had never known were taken. Some were of me asleep. Some were of me in the bathroom, taken from behind the mirror, which I now know was a one-sided window, and most of them were of me on my walks. I had always been alone on my walks until I had met Trevor and Anya. At least I thought. There must have been hundreds of pages just of me. Then, I looked in the drawer. There were two more, just as thick, and just of me. The rest of the night is blurry. I remember tears streaming down my face. I remember telling Anya it had all been a lie, and I could remember me stumbling home. Most of all, I remembered the feeling of repulsion and terror that overwhelmed me. I didn't even bother changing into my PJs that night, a fact that grandfather didn't notice, which I thought was uncharacteristic of him. I now know that he noticed. He just didn't mention it. He already knew the answer. When he came to wake me up, I was already asleep. I had been woken up around 5 by the multitude of loud footsteps downstairs. I rubbed my eyes. "Get in some good clothes, boy. The police are here." "Why?" He smacked his hand across my face. "Just listen to my instructions." I reluctantly obliged, putting my best clothes on. I hurried down, trying not to be too loud. Uncle Roger, my mom, and grandfather were all in the living room, a tall police officer addressing them. Uncle Roger gestured for me to sit on the couch. The police officer took a deep breath, and fortunately, "We couldn't find any trace of your Aunt Helen. Thank you for calling us. Most families are afraid to call the police. I promise we'll do everything in our power to find her." The room began to spin. Tears fought to leave my eyes, but I didn't let them. I rushed to the bathroom. I vomited everything in my stomach. I vomited until it felt like my own insides were gonna come out. I vomited until I felt like I was dying. Aunt Helen was gone. I tried to hope that she was still alive, but I knew deep down that she was dead. Aunt Helen, the only member of my family who truly cared about me, was gone. I was all alone in the world, with no one who gave a single fuck about me left. I was trapped in the house, never to truly live. Without Helen around, grandfather's attention would be turned to me. Life would become torture I could not bear without Helen. She was like the linchpin holding my life together. She was trying to protect me. I knew that now. For all I knew, she had a lover whom she never married, so grandfather would hate her and not me. She was so selfless, more so than anyone else I've met to this day. But was she dead yet? Yes. And I knew exactly where she was. I don't remember what the police asked me, but it doesn't matter. At the dead of night, I slipped out of my bedroom. This time, the door wasn't locked, and I was able to get out of the house. The hairs at the base of my neck were standing up, and I yet again couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shop seemed even more decrepit than when I had first arrived the night before, as if the rot infecting it had advanced. I weaved my way through the trash, ignoring the blood trail on the ground. I wasn't stupid, I just didn't care. When I arrived in the room where the photo album had been, I noticed something I hadn't before. There was a trap door. It was quite hidden. I wouldn't have noticed if not for the blood trail. I sniffed the air and detected the scent of paint. Was the blood trail really blood? Was it paint? Was I being led somewhere? All of these questions were pushed to the back of my mind by my sheer determination. As I opened the heavy trapdoor and descended into the earth, the first body was one of the elders at our congregation who had disappeared 5 years prior after trying to kick out grandfather. His body was suspended from the ceiling via a large hook that ripped through his skin like it was nothing. He was barely recognizable. A large knife was stuck into his chest, a large amount of dried blood along the hall. All of his limbs had been removed, as if whoever had suspended him feared he would come to life and run away. The second body was Uncle Roger's wife. This time the body had been nailed to a makeshift stake made of mahogany. Dried blood ran down the stake, and where there should have been a head, there was nothing but a stump of a neck lathered in dull red. I counted 3 stab wounds on her. The third body was still in the process of being hung up. It was Aunt Helen. She has been stabbed once. The knife that protruded from her neck was the same one grandfather had given me. Grandfather was sticking her to the wall with lots and lots of duct tape. Every single finger and toe she once had was on a pile next to grandfather, except for her left thumb. You shouldn't have hung out with those worldly scum. Maybe then this wouldn't have happened. He pulled the knife from her neck and tossed it toward me. I forgot to cut off one of the thumbs. Will you be a sport and help me? I realized then he was testing me, just like he had when he first gave me the knife. He was seeing if I had the guts to kill him, if I was strong or weak. And I was weak. Instead of stabbing him and putting him in the dirt where she belonged, I closed my eyes and cut off Aunt Helen's finger. Grandfather gave a dry chuckle. You'd be lost without me. Yes, sir. Then, he said something that surprised me. You know I love you, right?